just like to say good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our event NFT WTF. My name is Tilly Dunn and I'm an MA student on culture, criticism and curation. And I'd also like to introduce Eamon Cale, who is a graduate of the BA Fashion Design at Central St. Martin's. We've been asked by the university to explore what the role of non-fungible tokens could be within creative education. And we have some amazing speakers tonight from a range of backgrounds who I will introduce shortly. And we will speak about the future of NFTs within the creative space. But first, I'm going to hand over to Eamon, who will break down what non-fungible tokens are.
Yeah, thanks, Tilly. What is a non-fungible token? In a nutshell, an NFT is a collectible digital asset. So it's something that's recorded on a blockchain in a similar but different way to, say, a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. But what is a blockchain? What is cryptocurrency? Blockchains are historically used to record financial transactions, but they're pretty flexible. So these days you can find everything from collectibles to art on blockchains, and also new methods of finance. So the most important thing for blockchain for art is that blockchains are impossible to change. So an artist can provide proof of authentication for an artwork, which can never be altered. This proof can then be sold at auction, passing from artist to collector, making the blockchain market, art market very liquid. Should a collector wish to sell their NFT, they're free to do so, just as if they would be able to sell a physical object. Like a certificate of authenticity attached to physical pieces of artwork, an NFT provides an even more secure marker of authenticity. In essence, when you purchase an NFT, you're not buying the artwork, you're buying a token of authenticity of the artwork. Just like when you're buying a baseball card, you do not own the player, you're buying a photo of the player. But the deeper concept of NFT art is the agreed upon value and ownership. Even if anyone else can see, download, share, print out a piece of digital art, only a select few can actually own the exact piece. For example, anyone can own a poster of a famous Picasso painting and display it on their wall, but there will only be one original painting. So NFTs are a form of digital asset whose ownership is recorded on a blockchain. This digital asset, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, is owned by an individual who is free to sell and trade as they see fit. The central difference between a Bitcoin and an NFT is that NFTs are non-fungible and unique. But what does non-fungible mean? When you swap one Bitcoin for another, you still own a single Bitcoin. But with physical money, and the same with physical money, if you swapped one 10-pound note for another 10-pound note, the only difference between the two 10-pound notes is serial number. An NFT is completely unique. So continuing with the Picasso analogy, it would be like swapping one Picasso painting for another Picasso painting. If you and the other owner believe that they have the same value, that's fine, but they're not the same painting. So that's the kind of difference that we're talking about. NFTs have been around since 2015. However, they've recently gained a lot more momentum after auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's have started selling them. Following the recent explosion of NFTs in the public consciousness, we wanted to start a conversation around the role of NFTs in creative education. Now I'll hand it off to Tilly so she can introduce our amazing panelists.
So our first speaker is Dr. Lee Weinberg, who's a researcher and curator who focuses on the intersection between culture, curation and technology. She's a tutor on the MA Culture, Criticism and Curation course at Central St. Martin's and also a lecturer at the School of Communication, which is part of the Royal College of Art. Our second speaker is the Dean of the Creative Computing Institute, Ben Stouffer. The Institute supports interdisciplinary teaching, research and knowledge exchange at the convergence of creativity and computational technologies. Our third speaker is Matthew Plummer Fernandez, who is an artist and writer whose work focuses on algorithmic systems and contemporary culture. His varied body of work is influenced by the traditions of generative art, critical design and internet art. He is currently an associate lecturer at the Creative Computing Institute. And then finally, we have Mickey Elston, who's the director of ArtSect Gallery. ArtSect Gallery is a commercial gallery with a physical space in the historic tram depot, as well as having an online portal to their virtual platform Metaverse. It has a mission to promote groundbreaking art. ArtSect is working on the forefront of physical and virtual innovation. So now I'm delighted to hand over to Lee to discuss NFTs through an art historical lens.
Hi everyone, I hope that you can hear me. Can I share a screen with everyone? Yeah. So I'm just going to, I'm sorry. Share screen. There we go. I hope that you can see my presentation. And I apologize, I am not going to take it into a presenter mode because otherwise I lose the view of the screen. And you will see me looking back and forth because my notes are on one screen and my presentation is on another. So please excuse me. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and for this very generous introduction. My name is Lee Weinberg and I come here today as a tutor on the MA Culture Criticism and Curation course as part of the Culture and Enterprise program at Central St. Martin's. And as Tilly said, I'm also a curator and researcher, and I have been working on the tangents between digital technologies, art and design. And I'm coming here to give one possible perspectives on NFTs today from the kind of perspective of the history and theory of art. I have very little time. So given that I have very small amount of time, I will assume that some of the things that I say you will need further exploration on your part, but it's really just a teaser. And also it's important for me to say that when I was thinking about how to prepare this presentation and I was asking myself how to approach it, I was kind of dealing with so many questions of how I want to even define NFTs or how I'm thinking NFTs. And those are thoughts in progress. Some of them are quite obvious, but I felt that the articulation of them are really important in a discussion like this. And some of them are just new thoughts that I'm having about this. So apologies if my thoughts are not completely finished and maybe they are circling around questions more than they are circulating around answers, but I think that this is an important moment to ask questions rather. So a few disclaimers. Firstly, I think it is important to acknowledge this conversation is happening in tandem with many other such conversations that has been kind of organizing themselves in the past few months. I don't think that there is any university or art platform that has not created this kind of ad hoc NFT event to tackle with this kind of explosion of the NFT into the market. And this is one of the things that are most baffling to me, this kind of sudden urgency to understand what NFTs are, this sudden urgency to explain what they are and to come up with adequate theories, ways of describing, and emotions, a lot of emotions are coming up to the surface speaking about NFTs and the way that they exploded into the market. So what's most important here is that I feel that we're taking part in a conversation that is in process. And maybe one of the most interesting things about this phenomena is that we see this kind of field shaping, and maybe thanks to the COVID crisis and the fact that we're all online and suddenly all the conferences are streamed via Zoom, I feel basically that I can see this kind of discourse knitting itself from the conversation of different institutions, and in itself, it's just such an interesting and fertile moment to be part of. So I just want to say that, and I also want to say that I will be referring to some of those talks that have been given by other curators and other organizations, and I would really highly recommend that you go and watch them. They are all recorded because they were on Zoom, and I will provide links at the end of the presentation that you could access. So that's the first disclaimer. Another one is a disclaimer. around the nature of the conversation itself and its urgency, which I've mentioned already. But for me, it's really important throughout this presentation to keep in mind the question about why all this fuss. And I think that it's kind of a derivative of the title of this small event. So I am actually interested in answering two main questions in this presentation, or at least attempting to start answer. First of all, what's so exciting and then new about NFTs? And the second one, is NFT a new and exciting medium that will change the art world forever? And of course, that I'm referring to those kind of viral headlines that we're seeing all around us and that create that kind of sense of urgency around the topic. So I would like to, instead of starting to talk about the object that is called NFT, we will come to that later, I'm more interested in this event that brought such urgency to the discussion. And maybe it's important to note here that NFTs are by no means the first way ever found to monetize, evaluate, verify the authenticity or disseminate digital art. There is a whole subcategory of art called crypto art that looked specifically at the monetization and dissemination of art in the blockchain. But even before we were speaking about the evaluation and monetization of art in the blockchain, we were speaking about other ways of monetizing, selling, and trading with art. And digital arts exists in many museums and many galleries and many private collections. So there is something of a bit of a, let's say, false pretense in the way that NFTs were presented to us in the past few months as this kind of new and shiny thing. And many art historians, including one of the most appreciated ones, Christian Paul, have come up with statements to say, hey guys, this is not a new thing. We've been working on this for ages. We've been working on this for 30 years. Why all of a sudden the fuss? And also we will conclude with her and her worries about where NFTs are taking us in terms of the art world. So that's kind of important to note, and I've brought in specifically Every Icon by Simon F. Jr., which is considered by many art historians as the first digital artwork that was actually sold to a gallery. And you can take a moment to kind of read how it was sold and how it was monetized and how it was thought of. Of course, it was thought of in a completely different way. But it's also interesting to bring in Simon F. Jr.'s work because it's so almost like the inverse logic of NFTs. So it wants to sell in one icon, every icon, right? And it will take infinity for this artwork to kind of conclude itself. And so, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Maybe I'll just give you a moment to look in that and then I will recollect my thought. So yeah, in fact, as a community of experts, we should congratulate Christie's as a representative of an old and dated art world that they have finally found the gut to kind of enter into the 21st century and to a work of digital art that has been done for many, many years. And I would like also to note that this kind of let's say, mechanism of production of value by Christie's is by no means the first iteration of Christie's attempt as part of what seems to be a strategy to kind of put itself in the center of the digital art discourse. I know that I am criticizing Christie's quite heavily here, but I don't know how many of you were alive in December 2018. I assume that most of you will remember that another historical moment when an AI artwork was sold by Christie's for $500,000 and again created this buzz. I particularly remember December 2018, just like I remember this period of time, because so many calls and so many emails were reaching my inbox. Can you speak about AI and art and how is that going to change the future of art? And will we need artists? Do we need artists anymore? Because machines are going to create, and all those kind of really bombastic questions of urgency that kind of existed at that time, when at the same time, when we look really at the artwork, we can see that it is part of a long tradition of generative art, algorithmic art that has been part of the digital art scene since its inception in the 1960s and 70s. And then maybe the only thing that kind of changes here in the sense of the portrait of Mr. Bellamy, which I didn't accidentally cut from this slide, is that it looks like an old master's artwork. There is a brilliant article by Tzila Hassin and Ziv Niemann, which I'm going to also, at the end, I'm going to paste all the links into the chat box, that speaks about this kind of phenomena of AI art trying to imitate art, and looks at the really difficult questions around biases and the data that it fed the machine, etc. And also in 2020s, Christie's were the first one to ever produce an AR or VR work. So just a bit of criticism as to how we analyze and how we look at those matters of urgency that are set up by one of the most powerful, maybe, institutions in the traditional world of art, undermining and subverting a long history of discourses around digital art and around technologies and the way that they can be used and subverted in relationship to art practice. So that's just, and I assume that I'm reaching the end of my time. Ah, no.
I'm afraid so, Lee.
Yes.
Thank you so much. You've raised some really interesting thoughts and questions, and hopefully we'll have a chance to discuss them further at the end.
Sure, of course.
And so now we're going to pass over to Ben. Thank you so much, Lee. That was really interesting.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Is that a yes? Excellent. Okay, I'm going to try and be quite succinct and stick to my time because we've not got lots of time. So my name is Ben Stover and I'm the Dean of the UAL Creative Computing Institute. I've been asked to talk about how NFTs potentially might impact creative education and sort of my perspective on that, and particularly as the mission of the Institute is so highly related to that kind of discussion, I'll sort of give a bit of context. So the recent explosion of NFT-oriented digital arts practice has been fascinating to watch, particularly from the perspective of the Creative Computing Institute. For some context, the UAL Creative Computing Institute was established to work at the intersection of creativity and computational technologies, and the emergence of NFT market is just such an intersection. Furthermore, the Institute is a manifestation of our belief that computational technologies are a foundational aspect of creative agency in the 21st century, and that tools and platforms should be developed by creative practitioners and not just used by them. What I think this means for creative education is that just as the development of mass communication, photography, film, television in the 20th century provided new means of creative expression and communication, computational technologies have and will see new forms of creative practice and areas of creative industry develop. Indeed, we have seen this with digital media and web technologies already, but ensuring creative education incorporates the technical computational understanding and skill at the required level is key to understanding to ensuring creative graduates shape the opportunities in this space. In a very practical sense, the Creative Computing Institute offers UAL undergrads an opportunity to add a year to their creative degree and come and study with us and do a diploma in creative computing. This diploma has just wrapped up its second year of operation and has seen students from fine art, graphic design, fashion, sound design, drawing, and ceramics study creative computing together from across our 6 colleges. And to see the impact of this at UAL, you need to look no further than CSM's current In Bloom visual identity for the graduate showcase, which was designed by CSM graphics students who studied on the creative computing diploma last year. The visual identity they developed used creative AI and machine learning techniques using skills they learned in their time with us on the creative computing diploma. So NFTs. So then, in this context, what does the emergence of NFT art mean for creative education? Firstly, I think there are some important distinctions in the types of engagement with what is called NFT art. I would make a distinction between born digital art that can be sold as an NFT and physical and media-based art that can be transposed into the digital NFT space through reproduction, through, for example, photography. The reason I think this distinction is worth making is that born digital art prior to NFTs was not made with the same sense of expectations around its future status as a commodity, whereas physical and media-based art was made with knowledge of its potential as a commodity. This feels important to me as someone who was a young creative. I was drawn to digital art practice because it seemed to resist the commodification associated with older forms of artistic expression. It also feels important to me as a creative educator, as the development of NFTs have changed digital art's ability to escape this commodification so readily. And these choices can be foundational to students as they make decisions about formats for their expression and exploration. In her seminal book, 6 Years, The Dematerialization of the Art Object from 1966 to 1972, the critic and theorist Lucy Lippard charted the rise of conceptual art and chronicled the separation of art and object. This idea was a powerful one for me as a student, and in part made me see the development of the digital arena of creative practice as one that logically extended this separation in a way that felt permanent and freeing. With this in mind, the development of NFTs seems to me to undo the separation somewhat, and for creative educators seems to me to necessitate a re-evaluation of digital practices on some fundamental level. For artists whose practice does not rely on some of these sentiments, they feel free to transfer their physical and media-based art into NFTs in a more transactional way that simply offers new forms of ownership and dissemination. When thinking about how the emergence of NFTs could impact the experience of creative students across the disciplines of an institution such as UAL, I similarly think that there are two distinct areas of engagement to consider. The first is for students who make things: shoes, art, photography, photographs, 3D models, sounds, statements, and whose practice does not rely on the digital nature of the work for its coherence. Despite the fact that many of these things will be produced with software at some point, these things do not depend on computational thinking. For these practitioners, they do not need to know about the underlying technology of the non-fungible token. In a short space of time, they will just click the mint button in Photoshop, their phone's camera app, or their 3D software package. They will then benefit or not from the NFT art market, but their work will not depend on it for its creation and coherence. Most of this work will probably be unsolved, and Flickr will be reborn as an NFT marketplace. This group of students already has a creative education that delivers their ability to develop a practice of this kind. They may need to develop some rudimentary understanding of cryptocurrency that can be signposted by their tutors, and their tax affairs might be complex if they are successful, but their practice stands regardless of the NFT market. The second group of students, for whom NFTs represent a material property of the digital realm, and their practice builds upon this or seeks to subvert it or remake it. For these students, technical understanding and skills for experimentation will be key. These are the kind of students we have at the CCI. They require computational skill to be a first-party member of their creative curriculum alongside creative practice and critical thought. They will want to produce platforms of their own with their own internal logics, power structures, and community goals. They will want to engage with the material properties and dynamics of NFT markets, producing works in series, engineering scarcity, and commodifying it in ways that tell us things about this new media of exchange, its limits, its inconsistencies, and its values. These students will need a material understanding of computational technology. So, in summary, commercial success in art has, in the last 70 years, become increasingly financialized, with dizzying sums being paid by the world's elite for both contemporary and historical work. It should be no surprise that a culture that valorizes this kind of hyper-financialization has found a method to make infinitely reducible digital artifacts scarce. In my experience in creative education, has long discussed the effects on creative practice of this financialization and sought to engage in students with this discussion. Whilst the emergence of the NFT markets will offer some new possibilities to support their creative practice, they will be as prone to the art markets that currently exist to greed, excess, and risk. Given this, one of the most important tasks of creative education will be to ensure our students do not value their work in cryptocurrency.
What a fantastic point to end on. I think that's something we definitely need to discuss. Thank you so much, Ben. Matt, I hand it off to you.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. I'll try and stick to my time. So yes, I'm Matthew Plummer Fernandez. I'm an associate lecturer at the Creative Computing Institute that Ben's just brilliantly introduced. And I'm also an artist, and I've been experimenting with NFTs for about 4 months now. So I have a little bit of experience. Well, in NFT times, I think 4 months is considered a long time now. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is lifted from an essay that I wrote, and it can be found on my website, plummerfernandez.com/works/not-another-JPEG. And this essay is in itself embedded within an NFT that I added to the blockchain, and it can be retrieved. And so the website, actually what it does is is sort of reverse engineer the image and retrieve the essay. So what you're reading is actually embedded inside an NFT. So I'm going to be talking about Hikeknunk. It's a marketplace that was started, well, it pretty much opened its doors the 1st of March this year. And it was created by a Brazilian technologist and sociologist called Rafael Lima. And it's been a fantastic alternative to other NFT marketplaces for various reasons. Primarily, it's because it's using a different type of blockchain technology, which I'll be discussing in a little bit, which is considerably different from minting on Ethereum blockchains. I'll have to go into this in a little bit to explain it all, but it has a much lower environmental impact as a consequence. And it's also very much a grassroots creation. It's very much decentralized, it's open source, it's managed by a community of developers. It's attracted a global network of artists from all different backgrounds that have kind of really worked together to make this a really vibrant and dynamic and inviting marketplace that isn't managed and curated like other marketplaces are. So it's very accessible. It's been fantastic for artists in the global south, Brazilian artists who have jumped on this opportunity to sell their work to an international audience. And most of the collectors are artists themselves. So it's very much a sort of a trading site for artists to network with one another and to meet each other. And different from other marketplaces, most of the works, even though the scarcity is kind of part of the equation, a lot of works are sold as multiple editions to multiple collectors. And this is how artworks get displayed. And yeah, this is just a little screen grab of my collection. So being a collector is also a big part of being involved in Hikeknunk, being able to support other artists, being able to talk about those other artists and create a connection. And it's been kind of a really interesting social experiment as well as a technical experiment. And also it's been a really vibrant scene that's created a lot of special events, special hashtags. This one is SOS Colombia, that was started by Violeta Lopez, which was to raise money for the ongoing situation in Colombia. So all artists were participating, donating their artworks, buying the artworks. So yeah, it has a very different feel to other NFT marketplaces. It plays different roles. And it's also all open source. So I guess, this is possibly a good thing. And one of the advantages of this, for example, is that there are a lot of third-party tools that are created by other artists, other developers that help you engage with the project. So interestingly, like this, for instance, is a tool to see what are the top-selling artworks on Hikeknunk, because Hikeknunk itself doesn't deliver this information. This is another bit of software that I use called Hiktree, another third-party tool, which just kind of shows me in plain English what my NFTs are selling for. And so let me explain a little bit about the blockchain technology itself that it sits on. It's based on the Tezos blockchain, and Tezos is a much newer blockchain technology compared to Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it tries to solve a lot of the issues with those earlier blockchains. It was launched in 2018. It doesn't require the computationally intensive approach to minting to validate transactions. So what's normally called proof of work, which is where you have to sort of the sort of blockchains basically compute these computational puzzles in order to approve transactions. That's no longer used on these types of blockchains. Instead, transactions are cross-verified by a network of stakeholders. So you have all these stakeholders that are called bakers, and they leave a financial stake in the system, and that ensures that there's mutual trust within the system, and that's what validates all the transactions. And this is the type of technology called proof of stake. And as such, the carbon footprint per transaction is low, because instead of having like these high-end computers just validating transactions, you have them sort of communicating to each other. So it's a bit more like a global network of servers that's running the blockchain. And that's kind of what makes this quite different and quite inviting for artists that are conscientious about their carbon footprint. My own work, I'll plug it very briefly, is a series of works that I've been doing since joining Hikik called Cave Paintings. They use AI to generate these images of these kind of dreamy landscape caves. And it's been really fascinating seeing this develop alongside a marketplace and having these interactions with collectors and other artists, and kind of seeing also how third-party tools have complemented the dissemination of my work in ways that I wouldn't normally get through sort of conventional art dissemination. One example is that, you know, there's these websites now for being able to display NFT collections. So this is the Chris Wallace collection. He's got one of my paintings, obviously, in his collection. And so it's kind of interesting to that there's, yeah, as I said, what we're seeing is not just NFT marketplaces, but a whole ecosystem of services and websites that all interlink to create this like really vibrant scene. And that's it. Thank you for listening to me. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, and there's my website. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. And now we're going to swiftly move on to Mickey.
Great. Hi guys, so really interesting to hear all of those points, super educating. So we're setting up an NFT physical space in Hackney, but also with the attached virtual spaces in the shared worlds, Decentraland, Sandbox and Crypto Voxels, which, as Matthew mentioned, have become a bit of an ecosystem for education, community, and sharing experiences around these NFTs. So a lot really actually to dive in on everything you said. I'll quickly talk about how we're going to work in the gallery, as in with physical artworks pegged by NFTs, also several experiential points of interacting with either digital artworks or these virtual artworks that amazing artists have produced. But really diving onto what Dr. Lee was saying before about the emergence and what is different than an NFT, I think that's a really, really important thing to jump straight on. I'm more from the business, commercial end of the creative industries. So it's really interesting to hear your thoughts around the education. I think one of the biggest things that's emerging from the business sector as to why NFTs or metaverses or any of these new digital words are becoming a thing and maybe they didn't catch traction before was, yeah, it's this nexus of several things. So first of all, we just had a huge crash to do with the market economics and COVID. And then at the same time, you have tokenized communities, the blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. Then, as Ben mentioned, you have gaming technology, metaverse technology, AR, decentralized art or NFTs, and then just people's behavior, the consumer's behavior. And if you look at the intersection of all of these behaviors and trends as humans, this has given the possibility for decentralized art, decentralized money, decentralized content, or communities to become a thing. So as you mentioned, some of the historic players from the banking industry or now in the art industry, Christie's and Sotheby's, have noticed the capacity of the technology Matthew mentioned, the various proof of work, proof of stake, proof of humanity that a few chains are mentioning when you look down. And I think the concept of decentralized community-based art and education is so powerful that this is why some of those big players are moving so quickly towards it, and why it's actually so important to educate from the ground up about what we can achieve with this technology.
Thank you, Mickey. That was fantastic. So yeah, we're going to move into a discussion now. We kind of want a little bit of a voice from everybody, but I think our first main question is the topic of this conversation is how NFTs slot into creative education. And you've all talked a little bit about how you feel that could work, but we kind of want a deeper discussion on how you would see this being implemented. So I open the floor to anybody. Please feel free to start.
Well, if you look at the figures again, the financial graphs on any of the virtual decentralized technologies versus analog, it's a startling increase. So if you look at the problems we had in the education system over the past year, and if you saw the uptake, the onboarding of new students, the educating of students, and the sending them out on a graph, a 3 to 5 to 10, like we do in the business industries, and then you look at any virtual education centers that might want to open up. We're in discussions with the Seed, a token bank at the moment, to make them one. And if you just look at the analysis on the figures, onboarding versus growth versus long-term growth on that product or that category, it's worrying. So at the rate these virtual universities could add new courses, could add new teachers, could add interaction points, versus the way that an analog facility could just build a new building or maybe afford a new screen. Just from that side, we're going to see a lot of innovation very quickly.
If I can comment on that question, I actually want to go back to what Ben and Matthew were talking about a little bit, because in asking the question whether an NFT can be seen as a new medium, in my preliminary kind of research around this and seeing how artists are using NFT, I think that there is something of it that is similar to what the print has been for painting or sculpture, if you like. But while print has like a medium of its own, like there is the whole mechanism of how to create a print that may change the kind of expression and the trace that the artist leaves, the NFT is really about a platform of representation rather than changing the way that the artwork is produced. And you can mint anything to be an NFT, not only a digital image. It can be any image, any video. Now I've seen, in my recent research, I've seen that you can buy like an NFT birthday card for your friends. So I think that really it's more about critically examining in what ways art can be sold and artists can really take advantage of this platform in order to think about what would be the equivalent of print, let's say, to larger scopes. And there are some examples that are worthy noting. In a recent conversation that Rhizome had, it was called NFT Aesthetics. They have represented, for example, an artist called Catherine Fraser, who is creating NFT bouquets of flower that also have a kind of temporal element to them, and they kind of disappear after 24 hours. So suddenly the NFT as something that is kind of, let's say, materializing the immaterial digital object turns into immaterial again. And we're seeing also artists such as, 1 second, I just don't want to, Ezra Miller, that is using NFTs in order to send it to sell kind of versions of a generative algorithmic artwork that he had created. So I think that it is really interesting to look at those case studies that use NFTs as an extension of the world building of the digital art world, rather than, and really carefully think as educators how we are kind of negotiating this new, it's not a new medium, it's actually a new platform or a new market, and how you communicate with that. And I don't know if it has so much an influence on the essence of art or the art that will be produced as much as it will really, the real opportunity here is that digital artists finally can communicate with this old notion of the art world. And this has obviously positive and negative consequences in relationship to what digital art as an avant-garde, as a movement that is like really avant-garde at its base, wanted to achieve through its history and momentum.
Well, there's a very interesting point you brought up there. So I wrote that down actually earlier, so I'll dive in. The printing press, as you mentioned, when the printing press was released, and I really encourage everyone to study this exact thread, that first of all, the authorities, which might want to ban some of the elements of decentralization now, said that the printing press was, in essence, they were trying to ban it for the same decentralized reasons. And they said that too many people having the outside of the church and the authorities having the ability to print information, education, art was a problem. And if you follow the discourse, what happened there, and with the artists, creators and artisans, and the Enlightenment, it's a very interesting story. And then, I forgot my last bit, but yeah, oh, sorry, actually, yeah, a really perfect example. So, and following on from the printing press, if you guys have heard of the Mirror DAO or the Mirror XYZ, it's, if you guys have heard of DAOs, the decentralized organizations, and I'm sure, as everyone might know, if you're not from England, the Mirror is a particularly horrible piece of media that has come down from those older generations, and again was just one publisher owned by a centralized publishing house. But all of the young journalists last year, the year before, from who worked to underpin this vessel, this conglomerate vessel, decided to create a DAO and decentralize their journalism. So they've created Mirror XYZ, which is ran by the journalist network, not by the owners. And it's amazing. Like, if you look at some of the stories, the way the communities can vote on which stories get shown to bring up certain journalists over the others, and then there's gifting mechanisms to charities. It's a really interesting case study there.
I mean, I think Lee did a good job of sort of articulating how some of the traditions that NFT work is built on have a long and illustrious tradition, in kind of starting with conceptual art, I would imagine, when kind of artists look to move beyond the object status of the things they were making. I mean, I tried to make a distinction in my talk about that. I think there are two sort of distinct camps. I mean, there are obviously always more than two, but I think you can see the world of NFTs. There are artists where NFTs offer a way to build community, monetize, and kind of engage in kind of disseminating their art. And then there is a tradition of art practice around digital and net art that NFT platforms, practice, technology sort of offers new opportunity for them to problematize art in this way, offers new kind of places for testing the values of decentralized art and things like that in really interesting ways. And those people need new sets of knowledges in creative education, I think, to some degree. I think that the first set of people are developing practice in ways which they are, sort of we are well provisioned in terms of education for, whereas that second set of people are sort of working with unproven speculative bits of technology that are often broken, and they need some way to kind of engage with that, and that does, there is a technical overhead to that, and so creative education needs to expand to ensure that we offer opportunities for students to engage on that level. I mean, I think that there is money as a culture and exchange as a cultural object is absolutely been talked about in art schools for a long time, and I think this is the latest incarnation of that to some degree. And so there is a sort of a sort of kind of cultural understanding, a pop cultural understanding of how value is formed and made and disseminated and traded, which NFTs is an extension of that conversation. Again, I think that exists in creative education. I mean, maybe I would ask, Matt teaches students who make work that might be NFTable, and also teaches students who could make platforms and means of exchange. I think, you know, how do your students, Matt, sort of engage with this emerging space? What do they think of it, and what are their sort of hopes and aspirations or fears?
Yeah, no, it's been fascinating having students teaching on. I teach on the BSc, so I teach, you know, quite young students in the first and second year of their BSc, and they teach me about NFTs and about cryptocurrencies. It's incredible. They send me like they send me their investor tips on what coins are going up and down. So, you know, they're already there. You know, they're ahead of us anyway. And you know, one of my students, she actually for her final project in just this last unit, she's a second year student, she wrote a bot that will alert her when Ethereum will reach or a certain peak or a dip, so that she can get, you know, woken up to invest. And so this is the sort of where we're at with students at the moment. So if anything, I'm playing catch up, so I can best provide them you know, the sort of critical and engaging conversation to be had around this. And hopefully, yeah, at the moment, it's interesting that their way in is actually through crypto and through money rather than through the artwork. So it's only a matter of time before their interests will merge, and they'll see NFTs as a way of also engaging with those technologies. But it's really fascinating to see how malleable these technologies are, especially, well, the tool set that we provide students at Creative Computing Institute means that they can really kind of get to grips with, you know, anything from making websites that can run that can be synced with a crypto wallet, or, you know, making bots, making even potentially their own NFT marketplaces. So it's quite an interesting time in which nothing's fully set in stone yet. Everything's very experimental. Things break all the time, and I think that's the exciting time to get students involved.
Mm-hmm.
Can I pose another question in this? Because I think that one of maybe the central questions in terms of education as a whole. So we have those kind of almost research centers that finally are getting acknowledged around creative computing or digital labs within universities that are kind of attracting specific artists and practitioners that are interested in the literacies of digital technologies and are already coming, as you also suggested, Matthew, with a certain literacy. So with a certain understanding of how the technology actually functions and works and how to produce it and how to play with it. They are kind of native, if we want to use that problematic term, digital native, but they are native to these kind of ways of thinking. And I, as an educator that is situated in a different department at CSM, actually this morning we had a meeting, Alison Green, the course leader, and I had a meeting at Art Gallery in London, which is a gallery dedicated to digital art, and we're considering a collaboration with them because we are thinking about how do we take the MACCC course and bring in some more content that is related to digital technologies and to their contemporary use. And it's a really interesting question whether we think about it as a kind of specialized thing, that there will be schools specific for digital artists, or are we thinking about this literacy as something that needs to be explored beyond that? I personally feel that digital literacy is absolutely important. And I also think it's a really interesting pivot in relationship to how we understand languages, art as a language as well. And how do we understand literacy in real terms of, like, if you don't have those literacies in 10 years time, you will be left outside of your ability to monetize and also capitalize on things that you do and create online. We're all being in a way kind of abused by social networks, etc. I don't need to kind of reiterate those things, but I'm thinking as education people, what do you think? How do we, I mean, I think there is a huge gap. How do we bridge that?
I mean, just to answer that last point, this is definitely something that we explore at the Creative Computing Institute. How can we make all these technologies and tools more accessible and more inclusive? So we actually end up coding and programming a lot of the tools that we teach students ourselves in a way that make them more inclusive. And as Ben can probably elucidate a little bit more in the diploma and how that works. I mean, the diploma is a perfect example of how we make then our teaching curriculum open to other students from other creative disciplines.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I mean, in many ways, the CCI was set up to sort of answer that question in a meaningful way. But, you know, I mean, you know, backtracking a little bit, we received some funding earlier last year to produce a bunch of online courses on FutureLearn, which were, you know, often the first steps on this ladder. So you can, you know, if you look on FutureLearn for us now, you can do our introduction to creative AI. It's a 2-week course. It's completely free. So, you know, we are part of the kind of task, if you like, of giving those literacies. But I don't think it's an either or. I think that, you know, I think people will have fantastic careers with very little sort of digital literacy in certain disciplines. I think that will be okay. And I think that you know, like I said, I think that platforms will coalesce around moving sort of moving practice that doesn't rely on its digitalness for its sense of self and agency and coherence, and that will be made quite easy. I think that, but I think, and so that, you know, there's a group of people, I think, in the creative sector that will just be served by platforms and kind of processes. But I think the interesting kind of areas of new practice, new value, all those kind of things are at that place where people can kind of subvert things and break things, and so that I do think creative education needs to extend in that direction, and that's what the Creative Computing Institute is about. But both of those things can be true. It's not, you know, and kind of people can have fulfilling kind of creative careers on that spectrum. And so I think it's a bit of both. But you know, I do think that it's interesting to me how much of the sort of conceptual work of decentralization exists in art practice from the 70s. You know, it's a really interesting, you know, when I read about NFTs and their instincts and kind of what they're pushing against, it feels very familiar to me from looking at that period of art practice.
Yeah, I think definitely agree. It's definitely carrying on with the technology and coming back to that nexus of technologies that's made this emerge, new or getting newer, however you want to describe it. I think importantly, as institutes or business and people guiding the next generation in, us in the gallery and you guys in the university, is I suppose our humbleness and communication, because as you say, as such infinitely wisdomful teachers, your students are still teaching you about crypto, and the same with my artists that come in here. So as an NFT gallery, I'm still constantly educated by the curators or the artists or even the tech people that I speak to. So moving into this nexus of an understanding in the metaverse or decentralized world, I think more like in the original Enlightenment, I think our polymath thinking and our ability to communicate and move into that gray dark space with positivity together is going to solve those answers. And I don't think any one institution structure anymore can really help in that decentralized way. So as Matt said, the way that the communities, and I really implore any of the students to dive in and explore on Clubhouse and Twitter and see how they operate, how those guys are building together, the tech people open sourced and the creative people and the communities that happen. That's organic and driven by passion and interest. So yeah, that's a very interesting thing to see on the education and where it's going to take us all.
Thank you guys so much. That was a fantastic discussion. I think we're just going to move into audience questions now. Yeah, so we'll have the first one.
So this is actually from my father. Hi, Dad.
It was a great question.
Who asks if you can give some indication of the range of value which reaches the creator from the sale of an image. And I'm going to add an addendum to that, which is if there was a platform within an educational institution, what would that look like and how would that work?
I think that's a really hard one to answer because, well, ultimately, I mean, in many cases, the artists set the price. So an artist can decide how they want to value their own work or how widely accessible they want their work to be. So I know artists that take a really strong view that their artwork should be affordable and will purposely mint things almost next to nothing, or at the most maybe, you know, large editions that are, you know, like each artwork costs like £1 to buy or something like that. And that can actually financially be quite profitable at the same time, because a large edition selling cheap can actually earn you know, quite a big bit of money if it's successful. And then other artists sort of aspire to have bigger and bigger price tags associated with their work, so they'll be more likely to be minting one-offs or smaller editions. And also it really depends on the platform that you're on. So some platforms are sort of seen as higher value platforms in which we can see works of art selling in the range of like $10,000 up to like $500,000, which is crazy. And then the other thing to keep in mind is different marketplaces will take different cuts from those sales. I don't know what the percentages for Ethereum platforms, but like on Hikeknuk, it's 2.5%, I think, which is very, very small. So the artists make the most of the profit.
And importantly, in that royalties mechanism, when you code the NFTs, which is a thing in the communities, is so yeah, there's the usual gallery seller split, and then people have started offsetting to charities as well, so the artist can earn ongoing royalties into the future, which also brings up a really interesting debate about if once the artist goes, where do these royalties go to, and to what means your estate, your art estate, but and then also how these feed into other communities. So DAOs like to gift other communities. So if you had one activist arts group, often they offset their royalties to other arts groups. So that's a very cool mechanism that happens.
Maybe just to add on this regard, that so far, I don't think that the kind of blow up of NFTs has changed anything in the dynamics of the art market. In the sense, you need a curatorial performance in order to get a sale like Beeple, right, for $70 million. And you need a curatorial performance by an institution like Christie's that has a lot of capital, cultural capital and money in the backdrop of that. In order to make a sale that is so incredibly kind of mind-blowing. I think it's important to note that the dynamics of exposure and display might change in the future, but at the moment, especially at this moment of urgency, etc., when we are all kind of bubbling, I think that the logics that run this urgency is actually that logic of what was written here by one of the participants, yeah, the world of art market, not the world of art. I love that. So so there is this moment, and I think it's a really interesting moment to be in, to slow down and think, okay, one moment, leave that kind of it's like almost unrealistic dream of what an art, and it's almost like demystifying or remystifying the idea of the individual artist, the genius, that kind of romantic idea that can also be a superstar and a millionaire and kind of fall into those kind of trajectories, which I feel that really we should resist when we're speaking about this, and really think about the potential of it being a space for artists to really, as you were sharing here, to explore their own art. Yeah, sorry, I didn't finish that sentence.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to the next question, which is, what do you believe NFTs can realize differently than other modes of selling digital artwork online?
So hopefully I think Ben and Matthew could dive into some of that with the work they're doing with the students. But if you look into programmable NFTs, DeFi NFTs, embedded data within this decentralized art, which is a layer 2 functionality programmed within the piece that is very, very interesting for that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the hype that we're talking about is around this idea that there are new ways for artists to gather, exchange, and live. Right? I think that's part of what the hype is built on. I think it's still, the jury's still out, right? I mean, there are definitely vibrant NFT communities where people are making real money, real crypto getting turned into real money. How much better or worse or different they are to established ways of trading, I think is, it's way too early to tell, right? I kind of, it very much reminds me of a sort of romantic idea of user-generated content, which has turned out to be a very different reality. So I think it is interesting. But that said, that there are practitioners who are kind of making progress economically who weren't before NFTs, and that's a real thing, and that change, that is a kind of change of dynamics, and the kind of gives new opportunities for people in different places. As Matt said, that there are particular communities in particular countries that are definitely overlooked by areas of the art market that have kind of coalesced around certain platforms and things like that. So these are genuine things happening to genuine people, and those things might settle to much more towards the norm, or they might settle in a very different way. And I think we've yet to see.
I think maybe in answering this, we also need to think about the NFT in a wider field. So not only in relationship to art, but also in relationship to other cultural objects that can be sold in such way. What did I read the other day? An article that Barnsley has sold the script of the World Wide Web as an NFT as well. So we're seeing this kind of almost a trade of archival materials that are sold in such a way. And to me, it reminds me a little bit, just before the dot-com bubble bursted in the 1990s, there was this whole trade of URL addresses, right? It was like treated like a real estate, and this kind of logic of real estate continued and kind of perpetuated throughout all kinds of performative artworks within Second Life and within Entropia and other kind of multiplayer online games. And in a way, also there have been reports recently that, I don't know if we can call it an NFT bubble. I think it's too early to say, but it's already kind of blowing a little bit, right? So the value of NFTs is slightly going down in the last couple of weeks. And I think that Ben is absolutely right. We cannot really know, but I think it's really interesting to follow up and see the relationship between this movement and this surge in the market and what had happened before, with other hopes about digital technologies kind of democratizing and kind of disseminating art in new ways. And it's like it can be very easily be hijacked, right? Very easily be hijacked by powerful organizations.
One thing I want to add in there on the technology element of the blockchain as opposed to old centralized things is if you look at some of the auctions when Banksy's work was shredded, and if you read the articles the next day, Christie's estimated it put the work up, I think it was 30% or 200%. They had an attributable figure to this very subjective event. They were very specific about the exact increase and how much this increased the work, which is, I don't know how much I believe in that magic, but if we all bidded on one Bitcoin or one of Matt's works now, it would set a live price within the blockchain that is seeable and transparent for everyone. So I think as that mechanism plays out, like you say, there's a huge peak on the growth at the moment, but that will tail off. That's all fantasies, as you said. It's celebrity fantasies and magazines, and it's not the real world. So definitely encourage everyone to understand that. But as it settles and comes through, the technology and its ability to be democratic, educational, and support communities is very, very strong, and is in there in a way that the old world never did before, I feel.
Yeah, I think that data trail is really fascinating, just seeing how much data is collected about the lifetime of an artwork as minted as an NFT, or just tokenize anything really. You can tokenize a sporting event, but then being able to sort of track that over time is fascinating. Not just the fluctuation in its price, but yeah, its movement from like wallet to wallet, and I think that makes it extremely different from previous forms of selling digital art or making sales online. Just being able to have that, yeah, having that history that's recorded and can be traced. I can just bring up an ID number for a particular work, and I can just see all the documentation of everything that it's done. Basically, it's and that's what, in a way, is perpetuating its continued value and its secondary market value. It's being able to sort of treat it almost like as a crypto coin in itself. And collectors that are really into this will look at my artworks on graphs and just like chart to see if it's going up or down, and if I'm in the green or if I'm in the red, which is just hilarious. It's a whole new world.
It'd be quite interesting actually on that. As you can say, you can track the data, and there's definitely a blip, even if it did end. It'd be interesting to think what of these cultural assets that are currently of value, in your guys' opinion, do you think would possibly make the Tate or the Louvre in the future? So would we possibly have a CryptoPunks next to another picture, or have you seen anything at the moment? Because I think Sotheby's and Christie's have their eyes on items that they believe could be held in similar reverence. But yeah, as creative community people, do you see the same, anything emerge?
I think that there is something about, how history constructs itself, that if you position something as the first and the unique and the absolute pioneer of a time, it will reach the halls of fame eventually. I don't know how things will pan out. I don't think that we can say at the moment. I think it's a little bit too early. But I also want to go back to what Matthew and Ben were sharing. First of all, this kind of idea that the artwork becomes a token or actually a currency in itself, I think is quite problematic. And if we're speaking back to educational frameworks, maybe it's really interesting to think about how we provide our students tools to critically assess those kind of things and really think about how this flattens the value of the artworks rather than rendering it more deep. And also to say that, the main difference that was outlined here today is that basically the blockchain allows the visibility of provenance, but artworks were always valued by their provenance. And this is the kind of, evaluation method that the art world market, as you like, if you like, has always looked at. And it was a lot to do about who owned what. So if we are going back to this logic of, the artwork that is most valuable is the one that is owned by that millionaire or that person that has a certain political power, and therefore also has the political power of, announcing something as being more valuable than others. I mean, this is exactly the meaning of NFT, isn't it? To single out one object out of many similar objects and say, no, this one has a different value to the other. And what am I basing this value on? My contention, it's only curatorial performance at this moment, in terms of this kind of fluctuations in value, but it might be different as we move along. I really hope so. But I think it's important to look at that also. If
the old market is just a receipt-based mechanism, and this blockchain is a decentralized based receipt mechanism, where do you see the difference?
I don't see any essential difference. That's what I was trying to say. I don't see any essential difference. I see maybe, for example, what we saw in the last 2 months is a flooding of the market with NFTs. And if you look at most of the NFTs, I don't know how your Instagram feed looks like, but mine is filled with new NFTs and they're completely nonsensical. And it's cool. I mean, I love it. It's the randomness of the internet and I absolutely love it. But to speak about this in relationship to market and in relationship to those aspirations that we spoke about, that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is if we're talking about the establishment called art, this is why I said maybe we should extend the topic and not speak only about the definition of art as such. But if we're speaking about the definition of art, I don't see any essential difference. There are mechanical differences, but I don't see any essential difference between the traditional art market and what is happening now, only that we have more access to information, which I think is very valuable. And more people have more access to more information, which I also think is very valuable, but essentially speaking, the value of the artwork, I think, is still set up from in the same mechanics that it did in the past.
Oh, yeah, but I think you're attributing the wrong mechanics there, because if you look at the channel, there's creative production as NFTs, and the mechanics of the negativity that you're describing is the capitalist art machine function, and nobody said this machine is perfect or even good. It's horrible, we hate it, but that overlay is the overlay that is causing this problem on the perfect mechanism. And then below we have a FOMO, a consumer demand, a drive. But again, these two negatives focusing onto that chain, I would say they are separate human psychological faults, cultural faults. They're not to do with the mechanism. And yeah, just again, just to say that mechanism plus, like if you took out, like you said, take it out of the art industries, because I'm doing a property thing, and if you take out the evil corporations who cause trouble and people trading meme coins or getting too excited and not having stability and focus, we're really left with a technology that allows us to democratically share information, and for it to be more efficient than the old one. So just on the property, you can organize recycling, community, streets, lighting, energy better than Shell, the government and the council could have. You can look at Auto Bidder from Tesla and see his technology there. So it's a similar mechanics in that one.
Absolutely. I think the blockchain is a really exciting technology. And I think that actually certain art groups are looking at the blockchain and how it can be used in order to govern and democratize, for example, funding in the arts. I know one group in Berlin that does research around this, trying to understand how, for example, governmental funds could be distributed through the blockchain in a much more transparent way that could be followed up and negotiated by the art community. But I think that when we're speaking about these specific markets, I mean, it is what it is. It is composed by those really kind of fast interactions, which everything can become an NFT and everything is sold an NFT. We have the kind of higher curatorial performances of NFTs as kind of masterpieces of art. And then I think the really meaningful, as you said yourself as well, the meaningful work is done exactly in between, where artists are really seriously considering those technologies and thinking about them critically in relationship to those kind of old mechanics of power. And I think that this is a discussion that is really important having within our educational discourses.
That's a fantastic point to end on. Thank you so much. As for the recording of this session, it should be available on the UAL Graduate Showcase. Thank you everybody for attending. This was incredible. We hope to do it again soon.
Thank you
so much, guys.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
And nice meeting you all as well.
Yeah, let's do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for everything.
Thanks.